struggle with things like emotional or binge eating, stubborn weight you can't lose, depression or anxiety due to your body image, or have a poor relationship with food in general, this episode is for you. In the words of today's guest, most people know an apple is healthier than a chocolate bar, but some still choose the chocolate bar anyways. Have you ever wanted to know why? Today's guest is no stranger to having a complicated, even painful relationship with food. For years, her life was riddled with eating disorders, childhood obesity, mental health struggles, and even addiction. By her early adult years, her body and mind had been through the ringer. But slowly, she began to change her habits and ultimately her life. And it didn't just come down to eating healthier and abstaining from other substances. It also came down to the psychology behind her food and lifestyle choices. She's a holistic nutritionist and hypnotherapist with a specialization in mental health and neuropsychology, and she is also the founder of the Mindful Clinic. And you know what else is cool? She is the first international guest I've ever had on the show. She flew in all the way from Canada, where she is on their board of obesity. Today, we're discussing why some people keep gaining and losing the same 20 pounds, mother wounds, and how those contribute to our eating habits, how we can rewire our brains to make healthier eating choices, and explore the complexities of our relationship between food, body, and mind. Please welcome Jiordana Saade to The Spillover. Jiordana, I talked a little bit about your background in the intro and everything, but I really want to hear your story from you to kind of better understand your foundation of your relationship with food and health and really what drove you into this work in the first place.
Yeah. So, I mean, how much time do we have?
All the time. That's the beauty of podcasting, baby.
Okay. So I guess my story really started when I was 8 years old. So actually, even before that, I was the only obese kid in school. So this was a long time ago. I'm 30 now. I'll be 32 this year. And so obesity rates were a lot lower. And I was the only obese kid in school, and I was bullied and made fun of a lot. And so it really just taught me at a young age that to tie my worth to my appearance, essentially. So when I was 8 years old, I was like, I had enough. I had this experience where I was playing tag, and the boy I had a crush on. I tagged him, and he was like, "Fatty caught me." And it was like the whole world came crashing down that day. I was like, I've had enough. Enough is enough, right? So from that day on, I was 8 years old at that time, I went on my first diet. And I didn't really know what to do. So I just basically starved myself, and I lost a lot of weight. And the interesting thing is that people around me gave me a lot of validation. Like my parents were like, "Oh, now we can see your beautiful face." And the cutest boy in school started talking to me, and I had all these friends. And so it really taught me that, being thin meant I was lovable and being overweight meant I wasn't. And this just spiraled into decades of eating disorders and eventually substance abuse. And so because I knew if I was using substances like cocaine or whatever, that it would keep my weight down, right? So when I was in university, I went to university in Montreal. I'm from Canada. And Montreal is a big party city, and I was abusing cocaine quite a bit there. And basically, they asked me not to come back to school. So I was kicked out of school. My parents made me move home. I had no access to my substance abuse. And so I just kind of turned to alcohol at that point. And at that point, I actually met my now husband, and I got pregnant. And so I was 22 years old, pregnant, an alcoholic, and I had no idea what to do with myself. But that baby actually saved my life because I knew that I had to get down to the root of my issues. And so obviously I couldn't use any of my substances anymore, but the one thing where it kind of all started was food, right? And so in that pregnancy, I gained 80 pounds. And my doctor was like, "This is super unhealthy." And so I was like, I'm going to get down to the bottom of my eating disorder. So I became a holistic nutritionist. My son was 9 months old. I went back to school, and I graduated as a valedictorian with first-class honors. And I learned a lot about the body. I learned about how to reverse chronic disorders, vitamins and minerals. I learned about metabolism, all of these amazing things. And so I graduated. I went to work with a medical doctor in his obesity clinic. And we had a beautiful practice. We saw over 600 patients. But I saw myself in those patients, right? Nobody wakes up and says, "I want to be fat." It's just not a choice. And the reality is, Alex, we all know an apple's healthier than a chocolate bar, but we choose a chocolate bar anyways. Why is that? So I became obsessed with understanding the motivation behind people's behavior as it relates to their food decisions. And so at that point, I was like, I need to go back to school. So I went back to school to pursue a master's and PhD in behavioral neuropsychology. And that's where I'm at now. So my whole practice is really rooted in this brain behavior activity.
Yeah, and it's rooted in food psychology, which I had never heard of that before, kind of coming across you on social media. How would you define food psychology for people like me who don't even know what that means?
Exactly. Yeah, great question. So food psychology, the reality is like we all actually know what's healthy, right? Like we know there's so much information coming out about nutrition, like seed oils, do we follow keto, whatever. We all pretty much know what's healthy and what's not. But what about the population of people who know that but can't make the decision in line with their goals, right? So food psychology actually focuses on the motivation behind why we eat rather than obsessing over what we're eating, right? So that's one form of food psychology. And then the other aspect is really rooted in this, like, the connection between what we eat and how we feel. And this like connection between the actual nutrients and minerals we're getting and how that feeds our brain and our mental health and mood.
Well, what's interesting is that for people who have known me or followed me for a while, for me to all of a sudden be even interested in healthy eating, in healthy lifestyle, health and wellness in general is so bizarre because not only did I never care about it before, I also just found it very overwhelming. I didn't think it mattered. I thought a lot of this was very woo-woo. And then I had this aha moment recently, and a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that I'm getting older, but I was just like, oh my gosh, it all clicked for me. I started to realize, wait a minute, why am I so anti-big government? And I understand when the government is meddling in all these other aspects of my life that it makes it sucks more. And I wasn't paying attention to the fact that, the government also, when they have their hand in our food and our food supplies and, all these different things, well, of course, that's going to contribute to all these, different health problems. So anyway, I was totally bought in. And so that's why this month I wanted to have all these different health and wellness people on. Now, what's interesting as I bring this up to say, the people that have said that they have not enjoyed these health and wellness episodes that I've been doing this month, all of them say the same complaints that I used to have. They say, I can't get into this stuff. It overwhelms me. It gives me anxiety to know what is good, what is bad. And so because of that, I just want to give up. So could you, Jiordana, maybe break down those feelings from a food psychology perspective of health, being healthy, living a non-toxic lifestyle? It overwhelms me. I just can't do it because I don't know what's right and what's wrong, and I just want to give up.
Yeah, absolutely. And even one step further than that, like there is just so much information about nutrition out there. And in some cases, like it just does more harm than good, like truly, because it makes things so confusing. And especially with my population, people who have ever had an issue with their weight, like they've tried multiple diets, right? Like no one's coming to me being like, this is the first diet I've tried and it didn't work, right? They've tried a diet, they failed, they've come back, it's a yo-yo dieting cycle. And that's truly because dieting has a 98% fail rate. And so like, I wouldn't take those odds. Like that's a ridiculous fail rate. And so when you go into something like this, whether you're taking out carbohydrates or you're going high carnivore or whatever, it becomes overwhelming because there is too much information that conflicts each other, right? But the reality is, and like this is like might be a bit controversial, it's actually doesn't matter what you eat. Like, I mean, of course we can't avoid the truth. Like if something's poisonous, it's always going to be poisonous. But it doesn't matter what you eat. What matters is what you think about what you eat. So if you're going into it, like when we're eating an apple, most people are like, I know this is healthy for me, right? But when you eat something like ice cream or a milkshake, you're thinking like, this is not good for me. This is not good for me. If we're talking from a weight perspective and how the body actually physically creates a new fat cell, there has to be a connection between that mind and body, right? The body follows the mind. And so if the mind is telling the body, hey, this milkshake's not healthy for me, then like it's not going to be healthy for you. If you're eating a donut and you're like, this is going straight to my ass, like of course it is. Like that's exactly what's happening. You've just told your body what to do. So what I would say to like all of these people who are super overwhelmed is that if it's overwhelming to look at all of the information, really just check in to feel like what actually feels good to you. And then if you can make your mind up about something, okay, it feels good to me to like add more protein to my breakfast, then great. That's good for you, right? We don't need to be so obsessive about all of the shit that's coming into our food. It's helpful if you care about it and if you can get there. Because like I said, we can't avoid reality. If it's poisonous, it's always going to be poisonous. But at the end of the day, like it's a spectrum. It's not black or white. There's this massive gray area. And what you need to focus on to be a better human is really just step by step, making very, very small changes. Because if we go from 0 to 100, you're never going to be able to stick with that.
Okay, so here's the part that's blowing my mind. Are you saying that people that eat McDonald's every day that are skinny, the reason they're able to accomplish that is because when they're eating it, they're never thinking this is going to make me fat?
Great question. So it's actually generationally, right? So when we talk about things that are genetic, like there are some specific genetic codes that will predisposition somebody to be more likely to hold on to weight. And we can talk about that in a sec if you want. But the reality is there actually is no gene that leads to someone being overweight at all. There's no gene. There's no proven gene, period. There are genes that will make somebody more predisposed to look for certain types of foods, like highly palatable foods. And those people have a genetic mutation on like dopamine, for example. So they're continually following dopamine. The thing that makes people generationally thinner than other people is the way that they think about food. So like, for example, in my home, my mom is an Italian chef. And so her whole life is about food. Every single one of my brothers and sisters, they've all had eating disorders. My brother's like 350 pounds. Like, and so, you know, we lived in a world where like there was so much attention on food. This is what you can eat. This is what you can't eat. Jiordana, you've had enough. Kathy, you can have some more. So like because there was so much attention put on food, that was one of the reasons why as a kid, I learned to emotionally cope by using food. So I don't know necessarily that somebody who's thin, who's eating McDonald's is like, this is a salad, it's good for me. Like, I don't think that's happening.
Okay.
But I do think that generationally, they're not taught to like obsessively think about where is this going? Should I be eating this? How many calories is in this? Right? That type of obsessive thinking is actually going to tell the body, this isn't good for me, store the food.
Now, would you say that you became addicted to food or did you deprive yourself of it?
So in the beginning, when I was a little kid, I don't know that I was really addicted to food. I think I was using food as a mechanism to cope. And when we look at any type of addiction, like the disease model of addiction is old. It's done. Like we're talking about addiction. Addiction is really just people using unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's like, I know it's unhealthy, but I'm doing it anyways. That's addiction. It's like, I know the consequences, but I continue to do it. You can be addicted to anything, shopping, gambling, right? Like toxic relationships. And so I believe that the addiction really came with food once I had deprived myself for so long.
Okay. How, especially in the West, have we learned to think about food wrong compared to other parts of the world?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that this really goes down to like societal views on, you know, what's healthy and what's not. And if we go back, like, honestly, like, even if you go to places like Europe now, like, we're all kind of catching up. There's this really amazing.
Great.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
I was excited because I thought, if I plan this trip to Europe and I could eat all this pasta because they don't have the same crap in their food, it won't affect me.
Maybe 5-10 years ago. But now it's like they really are all catching up because the specific seed that creates like gluten or corn is another really big one. Like, it's completely denatured because of the pesticides and all this garbage. And so, but however, in the West, because we have so much information and because I truly believe that the health model of the West is like, we want to keep you sick, not dead, right? And so I have a really good friend. She's from France. Her dad's a doctor. And like, they don't even make that much money there because like their job is literally to like help that person heal. Whereas here, like doctors are like drug dealers.
Dude, they want to keep us sick.
Exactly. Not dead though, because if you're dead, you're not worth anything, right? Like just sick enough.
They need a client for life,
exactly.
A customer for life.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious, as our neighbor directly to the north, I mean, Canada being so close to America, what do Canadians think about America and what we get wrong about nutrition and food and weight and exercise and all that kind of stuff?
Okay, so honestly, we're not too different. So let's put that on the table. But 40% of Americans are obese. Like, that is a ridiculous statistic. Half of you guys are clinically obese, not a little bit overweight, not a little bit of clinically obese. What the is going on here? And it's like, you know, and yet the dieting industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? And it continues to grow in revenue, but we continue to get fatter and sicker. So something's not right here. It's like the solution to being obese is to diet, no, right? But it's not working because people are getting worse. And so when I think people from Canada, me anyways, who's like very awake and like, this is my topic, this is my niche, this is my career. So when we look at things like that, it's like, part of the problem is that you guys are just sold a story. And even when my husband and I are like watching TV here, like literally every commercial is for a new drug. I was like, what?
Everything. It's all, dude, did you see that just a few days ago, the American Academy of Pediatrics said, hey, Do you have an obese child? Well, here's what you should do. You need to put them on medication or give them surgery. There was no mention of going outside, changing diet, checking screen time, seeing if they have an allergy to a certain food, gluten, for example. Nothing. It was surgeries and medication.
No, this actually makes me want to bawl my eyes out. And I'm just so serious because when I was working in the clinic, we had children as young as 6 and 7 years old with diabetes, type 2 diabetes. I'm what could they possibly be eating that your cells have literally become resistant to insulin at 6 years old?
That's the thing. And there's something that's going on in American food that is not going on other places.
Yeah. And honestly, obesity is a lifestyle disease, right? So I have worked with so many people who have had that gastric bypass surgery, regain the weight, because if you don't teach the coping mechanism, if you don't teach the food psychology, if you don't address the reason why that person has overconsumed food for so many years, doing that surgery isn't going to change that. It's going to temporarily take the weight down, just like any diet, right? But that person hasn't dealt with the emotional stuff that led them down that road in the first place. And then they're going to have so much more guilt and shame over it. And your daily behaviors match your deepest beliefs about yourself. So if you believe I'm a glutton, I'm a failure, etc., then that's exactly what you will be. And so people have tried these diets and failed multiple times. They feel like they're a failure because they've done it over and over again. And you do that to a child, you tell that child, you give that child an identity of there's something wrong with you. How else are they going to live the rest of their life?
What do people, regardless of whether they've had an eating disorder before or an addiction, what do people tend to define nutrition as, and how do they get it wrong?
So I think that ultimately nutrition is literally the nutrients that we need to survive. I think that when we think about nutrition and where people might get it wrong is they start to think about these very nutrition-y fads like carnivore diet, keto diet, low carb, high carb, even things like intuitive eating. That word kills me. I'm so my daughter's 7 months old, right? So we come into this world as very intuitive beings. That chick is not crying for food and she's not hungry. You cannot overfeed her, right? And so we do have this very intuitive process, and the process of becoming hungry and reaching for food comes from the autonomic nervous system. And that nervous system is not that's not something we have to consciously think about. That's where all of our motivation to engage in any behavior, like going to the bathroom, our heart beating, our digestive system, we don't have to actively think about these processes, right? And so this eating is a very intuitive process. We're born with it. Somewhere along the way, we learn don't do this, don't do that, only 80 calories, only 90 grams of protein, and we become so disassociated from the actual truth. If we just all ate somewhat intuitively and we never had that disassociation, that disconnection, no one would ever be overweight. So I think where people get nutrition wrong is they start to really glorify some of these big nutritious words that take us actually farther away from what our body truly needs.
Do you think that people stay in unhealthy habits because they're actually addicted to an unhealthy lifestyle, or because they just think, any other alternative is just going to be too much work, or it's just too hard, I'll never achieve it?
Great question. So I think this really comes back down to that identity. So in order to answer this question, you need to understand that we have two parts of the mind, right? So there's the subconscious mind and there's the conscious mind. The subconscious mind is 98% of our day. So we live 98% of our day in this subconscious part, which means we're not actively thinking or choosing it. 2% of our day, and that's where all of our habits and behaviors live, right? 2% of our day is in this conscious part, which is where all of our goals and dreams are, right? So if you have a goal of I want to lose weight, I want to be fit, I want to get rich, but your body's on a completely different program. It's where your habits and your autopilot behaviors are. And this is why I became a hypnotherapist, so I could actually get into that subconscious mind, because I truly believe, Alex, people want what's best for them. If they're so defeated that they're it's just too much, I can't go on, it's because they've tried and failed so many times that they now believe they're literally not capable of it. Right? When people meet me and they're going to become a client, let's say, the first thing is I don't believe in myself to do this, right?
Yeah.
Their self-confidence or self-reputation is so low, and that's because they've tried and failed so many times. But if that's the case, it has nothing to do with you not wanting it. It's not about your willpower. It's not about your discipline at all. It's about a literal subconscious program that is wired for self-sabotage.
Is there any truth at all to when people say things like, well, I'm just big boned, or is that all?
We definitely all have a different structure. Of course, right?
But some people are just I'm fat and I'm just born this way and I'm supposed to be morbidly obese. This is what some people say.
No, your body wants to be healthy. like everybody's body wants to be healthy. It's literally born for that. Like in a single instant, Alex, you have no idea how many molecular chemical reactions are happening just to keep you alive, just to keep your blood pH at a specific time. Holding on to weight is a sign that there's an imbalance in the body. Like why would the body ever hold on to something that is not healthy for it? Holding on to weight is very dangerous for the body, especially when we get into this like visceral fat and obesity, because it leads to things like diabetes, atherosclerosis, like heart disease, some of the big major killers, right? So your body actually wants to be healthy. It's just that your behaviors are not like matching up with what your body truly needs. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that if you truly just like tap back into that body and like really wire your brain and your body to like function in a healthy way, if we rebalance the body and we rebalance the mind, the body will let go of all the weight. You'll create homeostasis, which is like this balancing act.
So is there a percentage of body fat that is ideally healthy? I mean, how do you even know? Because some people are like, well, if I just see a super thin person, like, okay, I've been thin my entire life. But until 6 months ago, I was one of the most unhealthy people. Looking at me, you might think, oh, she's skinny, so she's healthy. I'm like, there are people way bigger than me that are way healthier than me.
Yeah.
And so what is healthy?
Right. So I think that even just going to your general practitioner and getting blood work would be like your best. But if you were to go one step further and see like a health practitioner, something that's a little bit more integrative, they can look at your blood work and see a wider range. To answer your question about like a percentage of body fat, it's really different for everybody. I think the person intuitively knows like I'm healthy, I'm happy, I feel fit, you know? And so, but this is where like the body image thing gets a little muddy because some people are actually very thin and they don't see that. And that's why you have to do this emotional inner work. And that's why we call it food psychology and not just weight loss. It's like you have to do the emotional work so that you can literally learn to love yourself so much you treat yourself well. Like this might sound a little controversial, but I'm going to say it anyways. But like when we talk about this body positivity movement, right? You know, I don't think you're treating your body positively if you're like 300 pounds and clinically obese. Like that, I'm sorry, but that's not that's not accurate, right? And so we do want to be positive about our bodies, but so much so that we can treat it well.
Thank you for saying that, first of all. You're welcome. Some people are too scared to say it. It's been trending on Twitter, I know, in the last couple weeks, that even the word obese or obesity, it's a slur, and we shouldn't use that there's no such thing as obese, and you shouldn't call people that.
Yeah, I think that's a little silly. It's like, should we not say that people have, I don't know, like 88? Like, I mean, I think that when it gets to these things that are really sensitive for people, nobody wants to be called obese.
But it's a medical term.
It's exactly it. Like, we can't really escape it. So.
That'd be like, somebody struggling with anorexia. Like, well, don't say I'm anorexic because that's very offensive. Well, it's a medical term. It's a something you're struggling with.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think the more that we actually practice this, like, I don't even, like, ignorance about it, or like, we pretend like it's fine. Actually, the more dangerous it is. Right?
Absolutely. Now, when you talked about how being a kid, you were teased for being overweight, then you come home and you're like, okay, I'm starting a diet. Was that in your mind as a child? You started editing or changing what you were eating, or did you tell your parents, I want to go on a diet, or what happened?
Right. So again, we have to understand that I was born into a family where food is like the main focus. Like my mom actually has an addiction to cooking. Like she cooks for the whole town. So there's a lot of attention on food, how much I'm eating, how much I'm not eating, whatever. So I actually knew from a young age because my friends would come over, who my friends were all very naturally thin, and I would observe them, right? And I would observe that like they could just kind of eat whatever they wanted and they never gained a single pound. But the difference was that they like ate to live, whereas I like lived to eat. You know, I was like obsessive about food. I'd be hanging out with them for a few hours and I'd be like, why is nobody talking about when we're going to have our next snack, please? Like, yeah, you know, it's constantly on my mind, right? So I knew because my mom would portion things. If my friend came over, she'd be like, oh, she can have a little bit more, but Jiordana, you've had enough. So I knew at a very young age that, you know, if I ate a lot of food, it would lead to me being overweight. And that's what made me unattractive. That's what made me not be accepted, right? And as a child, like all we're looking for is that acceptance. Like that's all we actually want. And so because I was so isolated and I knew what the antidote was, I was like, I'm just going to do it on my own.
Okay, so you started doing it on your own, and that wasn't the healthiest way.
Right.
But when you finally got healthy after you had your first child and you started exploring all of the nutrition stuff and the health stuff, what was it that you were doing? What were those initial steps that you took to get your body and your mind to that healthy place?
Yeah. So it got to the point where I had, so even after I had my son, I still was very unhealthily losing weight. Like I lost 100 pounds in like 6 months.
Do you mind sharing what you were at your biggest?
Yeah, I was almost 250 pounds. So I was like 237, I think. And that was like, to lose all of that weight after I had him, I was very unhealthy. I was obsessively running, training for marathons. I would like double dose my ADHD medication. Like I just would like just do the opposite of what's healthy. It wasn't until I actually went back to school to understand the brain where I was like, now I get it, because this actually all stems from childhood trauma and the whole reason why I turned to food as a coping mechanism in the first place. Because, and if anybody here is listening who has these types of disorders, what you'll notice is that you'll have like on and off days, like good days and bad days. It's black and it's white, right? It's like all week I'll be really good, and then on the week I like can't control myself. And so that was starting to happen. So I actually wasn't losing any weight anymore. And I started thinking like, why is my weight so stubborn? Maybe I need to do a detox. Maybe I need to like dig a little bit deeper. And ultimately I ended up learning that, okay, if other people can think about food differently, then I can too. And that's when I started to really tackle the brain.
Why does it seem like there's always this 10 to 20 pounds that is so stubborn that we lose and we gain it back and we lose and we gain it back? It's like this 10 to 20 pounds that we can never totally get rid of.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that could be going on here. So one theory is called the set point theory. And that is that we believe we have a set point, right? So, and that's where the body is happy. I actually totally disagree with this theory. And I think that it actually has to do with like how your subconscious is programmed. But your set point theory is that like your body is healthy at, let's say 130 pounds. And anytime you try and lose the weight, you'll just gradually make it back to that set point. I believe that like your set point is what you believe you deserve. So, however, if you get to the point where you do this food psychology stuff, you heal your relationship with food, you're only eating when you're hungry, you stop when you're full, you lose all the weight eventually, right? If you're ever going to dip below that point where you will like lose a little too much weight, the body will increase your appetite to keep you at that homeostasis, right? So that's kind of understanding the set point theory. The other thing that could be going on here is that like you're eating something you're intolerant to. So that's causing inflammation in the gut, but also inflammation in the brain. This is where the mental health component comes in. It could be a toxicity. So it could be, a deficiency, a toxicity, or a pathogen. You can have a pathogen like parasites or candida that's keeping the weight really stubborn, that's preventing you from being able to like detox or burn fat. So for example, there are 2.4 million toxins that we're exposed to in our environment on a daily basis, right? And it used to be, if we go back even like 200, 300 years, there were like 7 to 10 toxins in our environment on a daily basis.
Jeez.
Crazy, right? And we have very primitive bodies. Like our bodies, it's going to be another 100 million years before we grow a wing. Like our bodies are the same bodies that we've had for 300,000 years. So the liver simply cannot keep up with the rest of the right? And so all toxins are actually fat soluble, which means they need fat to be absorbed, stored, et cetera, which means, so if the toxins are coming in too quickly, the liver is going to be like, where can I store this? It can't keep it in the bloodstream because it's going to protect the heart and the brain. It's going to get stored inside of adipose tissue, which is going to make that fat cell really, really difficult to break down.
You don't believe in diets, though. How come?
Well, diets have a 98% fail rate, right? Like, I'm not gonna, I went to a doctor and he was like, "There's a 98% chance you're going to die on my table," I'd be like, "I'm not taking that surgery." Like, diets, they're literally designed not to work. I do believe in educating yourself in what is going to be healthy for your body and not, and really learning to love yourself so much that you choose the healthy option.
If somebody wants permanent weight loss, what are they not being told to do that they should be doing?
Oh my gosh, it all starts with the brain. Like you have to start with the mind. If you've gotten to a point where you've ever held on to weight, right, then it's not because your body has done something. The body is separate from the mind. The body follows the mind. So you have to focus on transforming your thoughts around food, but also transforming like your subconscious and conscious mind and your identity around what you deserve.
What are your thoughts around veganism or a plant-based diet even?
Yeah, so I was vegetarian for a really long time when I was like 13. And honestly, that was another like just attempt for me to lose weight. And it worked really well at that time. And then I became vegan and I really, really just depleted my nutrients. I will say that veganism is really difficult because we become really deficient in some really important vitamins that relate to mental health. For example, like B12. When we're low in B12, which we really can only get from like animal sources, it causes irreparable brain damage. Like you cannot fix that. And B12 is really hard to absorb because it needs something called intrinsic factor. So basically, like you need to have a high stomach acid point, which really only happens if you have an animal-based diet, right? So there are ways to get around this where we can supplement with like a sublingual B12, and it's going to be literally absorbed right in your portal vein that comes out of your gum, right under your tongue. But my experience with plant-based and vegan diets is if you are going to go that route, you need to be very careful that you're taking all of your supplements, all of your nutrients, because you cannot get enough from the food that we have now. Like the soil is so depleted, the food is not nourishable, and so you would have to supplement.
I think this is the part that like is the overwhelming part for people is they're like, why do we have these people on the internet that are so gung-ho on only eat meat? Like literally your whole diet is meat. And then you have people only eat plants. Your whole diet is only plants. It's like, what is right?
Yeah. And the answer is a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have to find that healthy balance. We are not designed to be like a mono diet species at all ever. So any diet is going to cut out an entire food group, and that is going to create an imbalance. We want to have a healthy balance of everything. Do you need to have red meat every day? Probably not. But you should have a little bit or be supplementing for it. Like the only reason why I would say veganism or plant-based diets is fine is if you were like so hyped up on the moral aspect of like not wanting to hurt the animals. And if you are going to eat meat like we do now, eating meat actually changed my life. It changed my health. I'm so glad I went back to eating meat, but we eat like grass-fed meat. Like we're very careful with our sources.
Yes, and that's exactly how I am too. Two of my best friends from Indiana came to visit me in Scottsdale last weekend for 2 nights, and I told them, hey, one night we're going out, and one night I want to stay in. I want to have a girls' night. I want to cook for you. So I made lemony, caper-topped, buttery chicken piccata, and it only took 10 minutes to go from pan to plate. I used chicken breasts from my Good Ranchers meat subscription box because I knew that they'd be pasture-raised, they'd have no antibiotics or added hormones, and raised in a way that's better than your typical organic standard. The only thing, in my opinion, that can rival a Good Rancher's steak is their chicken. You can get anything in your Good Rancher's box from pre-sliced fajita chicken breast to garlic pepper chicken breast or unseasoned. That's what I have. Everything is already trimmed and ready to go to make your dinners healthier and easier. I can't tell you how many times I would pick up chicken breast at the grocery store and then I'm sitting there with my like culinary scissors trimming off all these odds and ends. I feel like a plastic surgeon. Only till the end of January, you can get a year's worth of free chicken with their new year, new meat offer when you start your Good Rancher subscription. That's 2 extra pounds of pasture-raised chicken breasts added to your Good Ranchers box for a whole year. Go to goodranchers.com/Clark and use code Clark. That's goodranchers.com/Clark and use code Clark to get another $20 off when you use my code. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Could you simplify the ways that our gut can negatively affect our mind?
Oh, yes. The gut-brain connection, absolutely. So we have a lot of pathogens in our gut. Like we have a microbiome, right?
Okay, you got to explain what is a pathogen, what is a microbiome for people that, like me, are stumbling into this for the first time.
Okay, so sorry, let me backtrack. So a pathogen is something, it's like a virus or it's basically like an alive molecule that is not innate to our body. So a pathogen can be like a yeast or a fungus or a parasite or candida is like a type of yeast, but it's basically like a microbe that is not innate to the body. Yeah. Your microbiome is the inside of our bodies is like filled with bacteria, and we need that bacteria to survive. Like we have more bacteria than we do human cells. And so we need to have a really good ratio of about 90 to 10% good bacteria to bad bacteria. And if you think about the inside of your body, think about it a bit like open real estate, right? And so if we have good bacteria populating the majority of it, bad bacteria can't move in. Now, if we have like rounds of antibiotics or are really stressed or we have a diet that's high in processed food, it's going to wipe out the good bacteria and then more bad bacteria can grow. Why I'm telling you this is because the bacteria inside of our gut creates a lot of these nutrients and minerals that we actually need for good mental health. So a lot of the B vitamins are basically like converted through our good microbiome. And if we don't have those microbiome there, we're not creating these like B vitamins like B1 or B3. And this is really important. B6 even is really important because we need those specifically for mental health. So B1, this is like if you're going to take a B complex. B1, for example, it's called thiamine, okay? If we have even a small deficiency in B1, you're going to see things like depression is one of the first things you'll see. If we have a larger deficiency in B1, you'll see things like confusion, poor short-term memory, imbalances. And the interesting thing about B1 is that it's used to convert things like alcohol. So if you think about somebody who's an alcoholic and they're drinking a lot of alcohol, their demand for B1 is going to be so much higher, right? And so they're going to be deficient in B1, and that's why alcoholics are known for having short-term memory. Right? But B1's also used to convert glucose. So if you have a diet that's high in sugar, high in processed food, you're going to be really low in B1, which is going to lead to things like depression. And your microbiome actually creates that B1. So, we can look at it from that microbiome perspective, and also the microbiome is going to create things like neurotransmitters. So this is where we get into like the hormones of the nervous system, right? So our neurotransmitters are serotonin, dopamine. Serotonin is related to our feelings of satiety, happiness, feelings of belonging. It's really just like this chill neurotransmitter, this chill hormone. Whereas dopamine is uncommonly, I believed that it's the molecule of pleasure, but it's actually the molecule of more.
Oh.
Yes. So when people have an addiction, it's always affecting the dopamine pathways, right? And so dopamine is the molecule of more, not pleasure. So when you have something that's going to release dopamine, think about all the good things, biting into a taste of chocolate, drinking, doing drugs, whatever that is, even just like falling in love is going to release a lot of dopamine, and you're going to feel good. But simultaneously, you're going to feel craving or pain. And the more you engage in that behavior, the pleasure is going to go down, but the craving is going to increase. This is why when people do drugs, they will, engage in the behavior, but it never feels as good as the first time, right? And so it's because of this dopamine. So to answer your question, the gut-brain connection, these microbiomes are actually creating that dopaminergic pathway. They're creating the serotonin. They're creating the B vitamins that we need to have a proper mood stability.
Okay, so I have two big questions after hearing that. Okay, so the first one is so are we creating an ideal gut microbiome through the foods we're eating, or how do you create that?
Great. So it starts from when you're born. So if you have a normal birth, you're going through the vaginal canal, you're getting that first bit of microbiome from your mom's vagina, literally coming out of the vaginal canal. Then it's like whatever's on the doctor's hands are kind of getting into your microbiome. And also if you're breastfed, then you're going to get a really good immune system, right? If none of that happens, both my kids are C-sections, so I'm not and also I couldn't breastfeed with either of them, so I'm definitely not saying that anybody should or shouldn't. Basically, that microbiome is going to be already denatured. So with my kids, I give them a probiotic just to make sure they're getting that good bacteria in. But one thing that will really denature we're born with a good bacteria is what I'm trying to say. And things that will denature it are the bacteria works on demand, right? So if you're eating a diet that's high in processed food, the good bacteria have nothing to do. And so they're just going to die off. But if you're eating food, whole nutritious foods literally coming out of the ground, that's what they need to survive. And so you're literally feeding the good bacteria. You'll keep them around longer. Yeah?
So is eating dirt good for kids?
Playing in dirt actually is. Actually, seriously, playing in dirt is really, really healthy. Even for your skin, it's there's actually this spray. I think it's called Mother Dirt, where it's a literal skin spray. So to prevent acne, because it gives you the specific microbiome that we need on our face to prevent acne.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So here's the other thing with all of the gut health stuff. If we are deficient in some of these different things, like you were talking about B1 and all of this, is the best thing that we need to be doing first. Okay, wait, let me start this over.
Yeah.
This is so above my pay grade and my intellectual capabilities. I'm trying to keep up with you on your level. Okay, so you're talking about how people could be deficient in B1, for example, and then that could contribute to depression?
Yes.
Okay,
exactly.
So is this why it would be important to go spend a couple $100s and get that lab work done or whatever that tells you what foods you're sensitive to, what nutrients you're deficient in, all these different things, so that maybe we could supplement that stuff with vitamins or supplements or whatever instead of getting on medications? Or I don't know. Is what I'm saying even making sense?
Totally. And I just want to say you're doing a great job.
Thank you. I'm trying my best.
No, so absolutely. So I think it's really case by case. So if you are experiencing symptoms and you've already talked to your doctor's ruled out all the scary shit, then like it's time to go to an integrative health coach or health practitioner, right? You can really start very simply by like, taking a multivitamin, one that is like not just FDA approved, but like one that actually has like the correct conversions of things in it. So for example, if you're looking at a multivitamin, my top tip is if you have no idea what to do, just look at B12. And if you see it in the cyanocobalamin form, do not buy it. It should always be in the methylcobalamin form.
What is that?
Okay, so cobalamin is B12, all right? Just like I said, B1 is thiamine, yeah? Cobalamin is B12. It's just the name of the molecule.
Okay.
Right? So B12 actually has to get into the blood. So it needs a carrier molecule to carry it into the blood. So cyanocobalamin is cobalamin, which is B12, attached to cyanide, which is like just slightly poison,
right.
to get it right into that bloodstream, right? And so it's a very, very cheap form. We don't want that. Methylcobalamin means it's methylated, which means it'll get into the bloodstream. So just a really easy top tip when you're looking for a multivitamin, which I believe is a very good insurance policy, right? Like it's nothing's in a therapeutic dose, but it's just enough that you won't become deficient in anything, right?
Yeah.
So I would say like if your kids are old enough, or if you have kids that don't really eat well, or senior citizens where their digestive system is so denatured, supplementing is a really good idea. If you're in this age group where you can eat nutritiously, like you can just eat well. If you have a symptom, go see a practitioner. Absolutely. Like work with somebody who can help you like get rid of that. But if you're perfectly healthy, there's no reason, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just try your best every day.
Yeah. She blinded me with science. Remember that song? That's how I feel. Okay. Now, something that you have talked about that I have never heard before is this concept of all of us have a mother wound and how all of us think about food differently based on our mothers because she was our very first food source, and that mother or figure has so much power over us to set the tone for our relationship with food.
Yeah. All right. So the mother wound is one of my favorite things to talk about because we all have it just at varying degrees, right? So it's exactly like you said. Our mother is our first exposure to food. And when we come into this world, so the attachment theory, which is a theory by James Bowlby, it's a psychological theory. It is the most important theory that relates to human behavior, period. Okay? So just very simply, the attachment theory is that we come into this world as beings that literally require the love and the care from the people around us to survive. Like a horse can be born and can get up and run the day it's born away from its mom and fend for itself. Human beings are very different. We require the care from the people around us to survive. And therefore, we know that our attachment to our parents is literally more important than our basic needs. It's more important than food, water, shelter because we require them to obtain it. Yeah. So when we have a mother wound or relationship to our mother, it has to do with our attachment to our mother. When we cry, does mother come? Right? Is mother struggling with mental health? Let's say you're a little girl. This happened to me all the time. Let's say you're a little girl and you're shopping and you want this toy and you're like, I want this toy. And your mom's like, stop crying. You're embarrassing me. Yeah. The mom thinks, I'm just trying to shut up my kid. But the child hears, if I express myself, I'm not lovable. And therefore, I'm going to lose my attachment. So the conscious mind is thinking like, mommy's mad at me. But the subconscious mind, that it's where all of our primitive behaviors is, the mind is literally wired for safety, not success. It's wired to survive. So the subconscious mind hears, if I express myself, I'm not lovable and I'm not going to have access to food. And therefore, I'm going to die. And that's where we change the nervous system when we develop this mother wound. That's how we can change our relationship to food, because it's like we didn't receive the attachment from our mother that we actually needed, which is truly just unconditional love. And so our primitive brain thinks food is scarce. Even though the conscious mind doesn't think that, the subconscious mind that's designed to deal with all of our basic needs thinks food is scarce, and therefore that child is going to be more likely to engage in behaviors that will allow them to have access to food, like hoarding food, like constantly obsessing about food. And this is where our relationship to food really gets denatured.
This is so fascinating because basically you're saying all of us have this. It's not just if you had an abusive parent or an estranged parent. All of us have it.
Yeah, just at varying degrees, right? I follow a lot of really good child psychologists now. Dr. Becky's a really good one. If you guys are parents, please look into her. And I'm not affiliated with her. She's just amazing, a big fan. But she will teach you, and if you look into psychology now, it's really all about cultivating that unconditional love. So when we shame our kids, when we blame our kids, like a child has no idea how to emotionally regulate. So when that kid called me fat, my conscious mind was thinking like, oh my God, I want to go home and hide forever. But my subconscious mind was like, if I'm not accepted, I'm going to die. And therefore, I'm not going to have access to basic needs.
What disorders do you typically help clients heal from, or what behaviors do clients typically want to change about themselves when they go and hire you?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's mostly emotional eating, binge eating, stress eating, any type of disorder where they are using food as a mechanism to cope and not just to simply like as a survival tool, but also then the mental health component. So, my background is in addiction medicine. So I work a lot with these like addictive tendencies. And I'm of the mindset of like, when you heal the nervous system, then the coping mechanism goes away. So, I mean, I was an alcoholic. I can still have a drink at Christmas and everything's fine, right? I don't go back into those tendencies because I've done so much work on my nervous system. And this, obviously, if you guys are hearing this just to like protect myself and you guys, obviously work with a practitioner. I'm not saying if you're an alcoholic, it's okay to like have a drink every once in a while, but you have to do the inner work so you regulate the nervous system so there's no need to self-sabotage. And so my practice is really rooted in any type of behaviors that relates to self-sabotage.
One term that I had never heard of, literally until a couple days ago, was orthorexia.
Yeah.
A type of eating disorder where you're obsessed with being healthy. Have you encountered that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's just when I was going through school to become a nutritionist. Like you said, then you became a nutritionist, got healthy. I was like, no, actually, I became a nutritionist. I learned all these things about the body and it got so much worse because then I was terrified of food. Like orthorexia is essentially when you are like obsessively engaged in healthy behaviors, healthy eating, or what we perceive to be healthy. And this is why I believe there needs to be a balance. I don't want to live in a world where I can't have cake. I'm sorry, but I just don't, And even though there's seed oils and even though there's sugar and even though there's that's not healthy for me, like I am going to have cake every once in a while. Am I having it every day? No, definitely not.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, especially if you're going from someone that was living a completely unhealthy life to healthier, which is what I'm trying to do, to say, all of a sudden overnight, I'm going for 100% non-toxic healthy.
Yeah.
I feel like that is setting myself up to fail because it's impossible. Also, I'm like, so I've been telling people I'm going for 80-20. I'm going for 80% non-toxic, as healthy as I can, 20 or so percent of unhealthy because I want to be able to go out to eat. Obviously, going out to eat with friends once in a while, I can't police the different oils or whatever that they're using in my food.
Yeah.
Trying to eat at home more, obviously that helps. But there's just certain instances, like I'm not going to deprive myself. And I also said before too, I am never giving up Dr. Pepper. Yeah. And I know that it's poison. So it's like there are certain things that I'm going to allow myself, but also I'm trying to be more aware and make healthier decisions where I can that makes sense for me. So I don't overwhelm myself and freak out.
Yeah. And I think that is a really healthy way to look at it. And so if you are looking into, getting into healthy eating, bettering your life, like I really, really take a very slow approach to it. It's not a 0 to 100. It's like baby steps, right? And the more aware we are and the more we can like every day, even just focus on the one good thing we do, that's actually going to spiral into more good behavior.
Now, since you're a food psychologist, I want to go through a couple different mental health disorders or struggles and then ask you what sorts of food should we be eating to help those things?
Gotcha.
Okay, so if you struggle with depression, what foods should you be eating and what foods should you stay away from?
Okay, so this actually might be the same for almost every mental health disorder, but like, let's go through it. But depression is really, we're going to need that healthy fat. Like your brain is 60% fat. And so we need the healthy fat to balance out all the unhealthy fat that we get in our lives. So fat works on this like kind of ratio. It's called a prostaglandin chart. But you guys don't need to know that. But basically fat's going to work in a ratio. So we get a lot of these like omega-6s, like these really inflammatory fats, and we need to balance that out. So things like salmon, but of course you want to get like wild caught, etc. Anything that's going to be like high, like avocados are really good for depression, but also things that are going to release like a little bit of dopamine and not too much that's overwhelming. So like dark chocolate, and that's going to be really high in magnesium, which also helps to feed the nervous system. And so yeah, but with depression, like you want to get those fatty foods, but also foods that are going to be like palatable in a way.
What about ADHD?
So good. So I was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid. And so I'm like, I know a lot about ADHD, but with ADHD, the things you really want to avoid are like the food dyes and especially MSG. And we think that MSG is just like long gone, but actually MSG has made a major comeback. It's in so many restaurants, like even really high caliber, like very fancy restaurants are all using MSG now again. I'm like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And when you're looking in the ingredients, you want to look for monosodium glutamate because it's not just going to say MSG there, right? So I want people to understand like what they're looking for. But MSG is basically an excitatory, it's going to create an excitatory excitatory reaction in glutamate, which is like an excitatory neurotransmitter to begin with. So it's going to, like with ADHD, basically the stimulus is happening and the receptor can't catch it quick enough before another stimulus is coming. So it's like too much information. When we have anything excitatory, there's going to be too much information. So it's going to create more of that ADHD tendency.
Well, what shocks me is that when I was growing up in school, no one had ADD or ADHD. No one, no kids. All of a sudden now, every kid has it. Yeah. And the first thing these parents are told is, oh, get them on medication, get them on medication. But nobody is talking about food dyes. Nobody's saying, are you giving your kids colorful goldfish? Are they, eating all these, whatever, I don't know, cherry fruit roll-ups, all these things with these food dyes. It's like, sometimes do you think just changing something that simple, you could see a night and day difference with your child?
Well, absolutely. And also then we're not accounting for screen time. So like, obviously I have a 7-year-old and a 7-month-old, right? So my 7-year-old, like he's playing all these games, whatever, Roblox, all these things on the iPad. We sat down to watch a Disney movie of my age, so like Aladdin, and he could not sit through it. It's like it's not stimulating enough for him. And this is dopamine, right?
This is exactly what I just talked about last week with Diane Bowden.
Oh, really?
This very briefly got brought up. It's so funny you're saying this, is that she said, just imagine a show from when we were little in the 90s, like Little Bear. Do you remember that show? I don't know. You were in Canada, so you probably didn't have it. But like, any show that we grew up, all those old Disney movies that came out in the 90s and stuff, if you watch that compared to any of these kid shows now, it is totally different. The colors, how fast everything moves, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so that's priming the brain. Like, remember when I talked about dopamine? That's manipulating dopamine. And so dopamine is a molecule of more, right? So we can't, when serotonin and dopamine are almost opposites, serotonin is like, I feel satiated. There's no movement. I'm just happy here. Dopamine is the opposite. It's the molecule of motivation, movement, right? So the more things that are hitting that dopamine receptor, the less satisfied we're going to be. And so with ADHD, there's an imbalance in dopamine. And so you're not just going to be satisfied just like sitting there watching something. You need to continually be moving.
Fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating. I know sometimes hearing a bunch of health and wellness tips can seem overwhelming. That's why I like the idea of changing small things one at a time to ease into a more healthy lifestyle so it doesn't feel like you're trying to drink from a water hose. Here's an easy first baby step. Throw out the big name tampon brand that you've been using. If you do nothing else, this is what I do, because this is something that most of us have to buy every single month. And then we're putting these toxic chemicals into our bodies. And all of these brands that we get at the drugstore believe that men and women can have their period. Insanity. And I don't know about you, but I prefer to not give my money to insane people. Start a monthly subscription with Garnu. That's GARNUU. Garnu markets their feminine products to women only. Their tampons are 100% organic. The plastic applicators are BPA free. They use no fragrances, no dyes, and they sell period cups too. And pads are coming soon, by the way. Their packaging is 10 times cuter than the other big name brands, and proceeds from each purchase go towards fighting human trafficking in Nepal. That's what Garnu means. Rescue in Nepali. Start with the baby steps, okay? Throw out bad for you tampons and buy some that are good for not only you, but the world. Go to garnu.com/spillover and use code spillover to receive 15% off your first month of organic tampons when you subscribe exclusively for Spillover listeners. That's GARNUU.com/spillover with code spillover to receive 15% off your first month of organic tampons. You can also just click the link in the show notes. For those who struggle with extreme shame surrounding their weight, how can they stop being nervous to go to the pool, nervous to go to dinner, nervous to go to social events?
Such a good question. So the way that I do it with myself and with my clients is you want to do it like an exposure therapy way. So very slowly. So I used to be terrified of wearing shorts because my mom always called me thunder thighs, right? So that was like always my even coming here, I'm like, should I wear the tights? Should I not wear the tights? Like it's warm here. I'm from Canada. So, everybody has their problem areas, and that's totally normal. Like we live in that world, right? And so what I did with myself to get over my short fear was I went in a place that I don't normally go. I knew I wouldn't see anybody, and I put on a pair of shorts and I just walked around. And this is exposure therapy. It's like exposing yourself to the terrifying situation. Because let's say you were bit by a dog in a dog park, yeah? If you never go back to the dog park, you're always going to be afraid of dogs. So this is we have to expose ourselves to the trigger. And honestly, nobody gives a about you. Like truly nobody cares about you. They're all hyper-focused on themselves. And so if you can expose yourself a little, like, just take your shirt off and then see how that feels. And then eventually you can take your pants off.
And then you're naked at the dinner party. No, I'm just kidding.
Eventually, you're actually going to get used to it, right? And then just to follow that up, again, a reminder that the body's going to follow the mind. So if you are shameful, let's say you're looking in the mirror, right? And you're like, oh, I'm so fat. You would think that that thought would make you want to go to the gym and do something about it, right? Mm-hmm. But when you say, I'm so fat, you've now created an identity. So the thought is, I'm so fat. The feeling is, I feel like shit about myself. And the behavior is going to match the thought. So you're going to self-sabotage, right? And so even just having those negative thoughts about yourself is what's perpetuating the behaviors that lead to that disorder.
What are some powerful weight loss tools that can be implemented today? As soon as they're done listening to this interview, they can start this.
Okay. So you need to be able to distinguish between what is true hunger and what is a craving. If you cannot tell the difference between that, like you will always overeat, right? And so how I tell the difference between true hunger and a craving, and some people might not like this, but honestly, it would take 90 days for the average person to die of starvation now. 90 days. Okay. It used to take 30. Now it's taking triple the time, 90 days. So when people are like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm like, you're not hungry. You're not starving ever. If you had a meal that was like even a couple of hours ago, like you've got enough. And when you feel that desire to eat, that craving, but you don't reinforce it by eating, the body is actually forced then to go into stored fat to burn that for energy. So it's actually like very ideal, right? And so I have a really quick trick that you guys can do at home that will allow you to determine if it's true hunger or craving, okay? So I call it the broccoli test. And so I know that you hate vegetables, so we might think
I hate fruit the most. I actually do like quite a bit of vegetables.
Okay. So we'll stick with the broccoli test then. And if you hate broccoli, then pick a vegetable that is like very muted for you, that isn't like exciting. And the only question you need to ask yourself if you have the desire to eat is, would I eat raw broccoli right now? And if the answer is no, then you're probably not hungry. Right? Because true hunger is, I'm so hungry, I would eat anything. False hunger or craving is like something specific. I want something salty. I want something sweet. I want something crunchy. That is not real hunger. That is feeding the nervous system to like create some excitatory things there so that you have more dopamine and the brain feels happy, not the stomach.
I love this. Love this. That is such a good hack. Okay, so speaking of hacks,
yes.
What is habit stacking and how can that help us on our health journeys?
Love it. So habit stacking is basically when we're doing two things at once. It's like multitasking. So a good example for habit stacking for me is that if I'm walking, I'm going to listen to a podcast or an audiobook, right? And so it's going to allow me to, I'm going to learn at the same time as me walking. And so
like what someone might be doing now. They might be walking or working out and listening to us.
That's exactly it. And right, so it's kind of getting like two things done at once. And I think this is really important because, I mean, I'm a mother of two. I'm in school. I run a full-time practice. Like, I'm sure you guys are all really busy and nobody has time to like implement these massive health goals. And so if we just take like 10, 20 minutes out of the day, you don't have to be running. You don't need to do a 60-minute boot camp to be healthy. And in fact, our bodies aren't even designed for that, right? Like we're bipedal. We just need to walk. And so it's really being able to like do kind of two things at once.
What are the toughest pills to swallow when it comes to weight loss?
Yeah, a pill's really not going to help you. Like I think like that's like one of the toughest pills to swallow. It's like there literally is no magic pill. And right now there's like a huge uproar about Ozempic and how like the Kardashians took it and they lost all this weight. And Ozempic is actually quite dangerous if you don't have diabetes. So nobody should be injecting themselves with that. And I think that people think that this like magic pill solution, whether it's bariatric surgery or, a weight loss supplement is going to work, but they're not addressing the reason why their body held on to weight in the first place.
Why do we need to stop treating weekends differently than weekdays?
Because it creates this all or none behavior. Like it creates this black and white thinking. We actually need there to be balance so that, because here, for example, let's say all week you're really good and then on the weekend you like overindulge. How are you going to feel after that weekend? Right? You're going to feel like garbage and then you create an identity. I'm a failure, shouldn't have done that. Got to get back on track on Monday.
Yep.
And then you fall into that restrictive during the week and the indulgence on the weekend. That's binge eating. That's what binging is. It's restriction and then overconsumption.
What is the difference between self-esteem and self-worth?
Oh, so good. Okay, so self-esteem is like how I think about myself, my job, what I'm wearing, the friends I have. Self-worth is like regardless of any of that, I'm just worthy. I'm just worthy being me.
So let's say a parent is listening to this and they know that they have a child struggling with childhood obesity, but they're so scared of addressing it in the right way because they don't want to inflict trauma. How should they go about that?
Right. So with my kids, and again, might not be a popular opinion, but I actually give my kids whatever they want to eat, and I never force them to finish their plate ever. So I, on the other hand, will take the time to make myself these beautiful, healthy meals because if my son wants hot dogs and mac and cheese, which he wants all the time, when he grows up, he's actually going to do as I do, not as I say. So you want to first model that behavior yourself. If you're a parent and you have an obese kid and you're not already taking care of yourself, it's not going to work, right? So you model the behavior first, and then also you do things as a family. Can we go for a walk after dinner?
I was just going to say, if you're a parent who's, you know that you also are overweight, just being like, hey, I'm going to go for a hike and do something fun. You want to come with?
Exactly. Yeah. You make it fun, right? And we don't talk about restriction at all, but like, where's the kid getting the food? Like, the kid's not going to the grocery store.
That's the thing, dude.
You know?
That's the thing. That's the thing. Now, you've talked about this before. You believe that our bodies can actually heal from any disorder if they're given the right environment. Now, some people are like, well, I do not believe that. But what do you mean by the body can heal any disorder, and how can the body do that?
Right. So unless you were literally born with something, and then in that case, like something probably happened in vitro, the body's job is to create homeostasis, which just means balance. The body's job is every single moment is trying to rebalance itself. So any type of physical disorder first starts in the brain. The body cannot manifest anything unless the brain has already been so denatured for so long. And so the body is capable of healing. Like, can we heal every stage of cancer? Sometimes things are too far gone, but if we caught it earlier, absolutely. And so really, it's just getting down to the root cause, understanding where the imbalance actually happened. And you have to do the emotional work. You absolutely have to. You can't ignore the mind. And then rebalance the body.
And so that would be what you call rewiring your brain in terms of food, correct?
Yes and no. So when I talk about rewiring your brain in terms of food, I literally mean like changing the way that you think about food, right? And so if it goes back to that donut. If I'm eating the donut, I think it's bad for me, it will be. But obviously, because we have so many years of these like very strict ideas of what's healthy and what's not, rewiring the brain is really like, okay, finding then an expander. Like if somebody's thin and is eating that donut, can I also be that person? Can I think about it differently?
How would you define traditional weight loss versus mindful weight loss?
Yeah. So traditional weight loss is really just, I mean, again, addressing it as it's like a disease. And obesity is a disease. I'm not saying it's not, but traditional weight loss focuses on the body. It's like, okay, we need to cut calories. We need to exercise more. It focuses on the body. Mindful weight loss is like, it's a lot slower. So if you're doing a diet, whatever, you're going to lose weight a lot quicker, right? And that's the appeal of it. But mindful weight loss is a lot slower because it's really about very, very slow and steady steps every day, just making and keeping small daily promises to yourself to eventually lead to this like really healthy outlook. And that, although is a lot slower, is a lot more sustainable.
How come sometimes people will lose weight in some way, shape, or form, and then they go and they try to do the same thing later, and that doesn't work?
Yeah. Again, it's like it's what your brain is wired for. So, you know, it depends on how they lost the weight. So when I first did keto, I lost like all this weight. I was like, yes, this works. And then I gained the weight back. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to go do keto again. But so basically there's this primitive part of the brain, right? The primitive part of the brain deals with all of our like basic needs. So like eating, water, shelter, etc. So the primitive part of the brain doesn't actually know the difference between an apple and a milkshake. Do you have pets, Alex?
No.
Okay. So if you can think about a dog, right? When you give a dog a milkshake and an apple, the dog is not eating the milkshake being like, this is going straight to my ass. Like the dog is eating the milkshake and being like, this is delicious, right? And so our primitive part of the brain actually deals with food, right? And so if the primitive part of the brain doesn't know the difference between a milkshake and an apple, then when you're telling yourself like, oh, I need to cut out the milkshake, the primitive part of the brain thinks food is going to be scarce, not just the milkshake. All food is going to be scarce. Like it's literally going to think like this girl's going to starve me again. And so it's going to drive behavior from the subconscious to overconsume. And that's where you're going to regain the weight.
Now, this is what is interesting to me about you. You are also a clinical hypnotherapist. What is that? That sounds like some weird mumbo jumbo.
It kind of is. And people honestly always think hypnotherapy is like mind control. Like, and it gets such a bad rep on TV. And that's definitely not what I do. Like, I'm not having my clients like quack like a chicken and whatever, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. What are the misconceptions and myths surrounding hypnosis?
So people think hypnosis is mind control, and it's not. Like, I mean, there are certain stages of hypnosis that I can get you in, for example, like a cataleptic state. So hypnotherapy was originally designed to allow people to go through surgery without feeling pain. So it's like an anesthesia. So I've watched a 4-hour brain surgery where the woman was not given any anesthesia and felt no pain at all.
I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, me neither. They also do like hypnobirthing. I did not elect for that, right? So, but hypnotherapy, all it does is it just gets into the subconscious mind. So when I'm talking about the subconscious, I'm like, this is where all of our habits and behaviors live. So if you have a habit or a behavior that you want to change that you just can't, you can't think your way out of it. It doesn't matter how much you want to change. You have to change the subconscious because like it should be that if we have a desire, our behavior just follows that. But if it's not, there's a program that's running there that like self-sabotages your goal. And so that's where we need to do the subconscious work. So all hypnotherapy does is like, it's basically like guided meditation. It just gets you into a hypnotic state, which just means that it's like a very restful state. The reason why this is important is because then we have the theta brainwaves present. So we have like alpha, theta, delta, beta. So when we're in a theta brainwave state, our brainwaves are primed for learning and changing. And so when we're in that restful state, hypnotherapy is just going to give you suggestions, which is going to like allow you to change your behavior.
Okay, so what is the success rate for something like this? And what are you telling people when they're under hypnosis? Like, are you getting them to say, I'm never going to get fast food. I'm never going to get fast food. Like, what do you do when they're in that state?
Yeah. So it really is, again, different for everybody. Like I have a very general hypnotherapy track that you can literally just download for free on my website. And in that track, you're going to hear things like, I eat when I'm hungry. I stop when I'm full. My taste corresponds to the true needs of my body, which I think is really important. Like, we don't just want to be like, I hate sugar, like that, because that's just not realistic, right? And the success rate literally depends on how much you believe it. So if you're going through hypnotherapy and you're like, this is I don't think it's going to work. Like, it's not, right? Like it's all about your mind. But if you go through it and you have the belief of like, this is going to change my brain, I'm going to just surrender to it and see what happens. The success can be insane. Like I've seen people go from like, literally they eat like 7 rows of Oreos in one sitting to like now like they can keep Oreos in their house. They don't even want one.
Wow. Yeah. I think about people like, stopping smoking and things like that.
I've done that in one session with somebody where they were a chronic smoker. One session, they no longer smoke. But you have to be so ready, right? Like I've also had smokers where we've done the sessions, we've done 3 months of a program and they still pick it back up, right? So it really just depends on what you want.
I had a guy on season 1. No. I had a guy on, I think, season 2, and he is a huge proponent and fan of ayahuasca and psychedelics, and how he believes doing those at different points of his life have completely changed his mental health, made him a better husband, made him a better father, and a very fascinating episode. And you also talk a lot about psychedelics and how you believe they can help a person as they are rewiring their brain to, want to healthy eat and all this kind of stuff. So what is your perspective on psychedelics?
Yeah, so this is what I'm writing my thesis on. So my thesis is on the efficacy of psychedelic use for eating psychopathology in the form of overconsumption. So just like obviously in plain English, it's just like how effective are psychedelics for changing overeating behavior? Yeah, and so psychedelics are really fascinating. And the thing is that they were originally designed and used for preventing addiction, right? And so if we look into the history of it, the guy who developed AA, the whole reason why he became sober was because he engaged in psychedelic therapy. And so it does have this amazing effect of allowing your brain to think differently. Alex, I want you to think about the brain as a deeply wooded forest, okay? Imagine there's like all these like really wooded trees. Every time you walk on a path in the forest, it becomes easier and easier to walk on that path, right? So you're walking on the path and like, it's like we've made a groove. We walk on the path over and over again. So the brain does that. When we have a thought, it creates these patterns and programs. The ones we don't use just like go away. It's like we prune them away. what psychedelics do is it allows the brain to think differently. It allows the brain to create new connections, new programs. So people that are stuck in addiction, people that are stuck in like depression, the cyclical cycle of anxiety, mental health, whatever, they have these very, very, very stringent programs. And so psychedelics allows their brains to expand and use different parts of their brain to create new ideas.
So speaking of walking in those patterns, creating those patterns in our brain, that whole like picture that you just painted, how long do you think it takes for people to really build a new habit in terms of healthy eating, healthy lifestyle?
Yeah. So if we're starting super slow, let's say, for example, when a client would come in and they're having like a large double-double. Do you guys know what that is here?
Is that like a McDonald's thing?
No. So a large coffee with like 2 milks, 2 sugar.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm thinking of double hamburger or something.
No. I mean, that would have worked too. But so if I have a client who's coming in and is having a large coffee, 2 milks, 2 sugars, my first exercise with them is I might get them to reduce down to 1 milk, 1 sugar, right? So that habit can actually happen overnight. But if we're talking about creating a new habit, like in going to the gym or whatever, it does take about a 21-day cycle. But again, you want to start slow.
How about somebody who they don't necessarily want to lose weight, but they do want to start creating new habits and rewiring their brain to just cultivate a new lifestyle? What are some things that they could start today?
Yeah. So again, it's really just checking in with yourself and asking like, am I really hungry? Am I full? And then really analyzing yourself for the behaviors that you want to change. So either if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you love everything about your life, then there is really nothing to work on, right? But the beauty about life is it's a journey and there's always going to be things you want to accomplish. And so when you're looking at your goals, like the most important thing is you just want to make and keep the daily promises to yourself, because as soon as you make a promise, but you don't keep it, you then think I'm unreliable. And if you have the identity of I'm unreliable, you're going to lose control in other situations.
Jiordana, you have your own podcast.
I do, yes.
So I know that some cute conservatives are listening. They're like, I need more of this. Where can they find that and subscribe?
Yeah, so I'm on Spotify and I'm also on iTunes or Apple Podcast. And so it's called the Head to Heal podcast. We talk about a lot of topics. I do some interviews, but it's mostly just like me rambling a lot like this. So
people love it. People love it. And then you're also on Instagram. What's that?
Yeah, so it's just my name. So it's at Jiordana Saade. And my name's spelled differently, but I'm sure you'll link it up.
Yes, yeah. Everything will be in the show notes, so don't worry about that. This was freaking fascinating.
I'm so glad.
I am learning so much, and I think this whole subject matter, I definitely want to keep bringing this back even after this health and wellness month that we're doing this month. I mean, I want to have guests like this on a lot more because of people like you, because it is so fascinating. And I love whenever I feel like, oh my gosh, wow, I just learned 100 new things in 90 minutes or however long this was. Thank you so much for coming on the Spillover.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I've had so much fun.
The way I'm so obsessed with Jiordana's delivery, just the way she explained everything and was so real. I appreciated her candidness on this entire subject so much. Okay, so I was like, okay, there's no way 40% of Americans are obese. So I fact-checked that after the interview, all right? It's actually over 41% of Americans that are obese. That is outrageous. For those of you that have had an up and down relationship with your weight or grew up with an unhealthy relationship with food in your family, I'd love to know if you found Jiordana's expertise helpful. Maybe you disagree with some. Maybe you were like, wow, I had an aha moment. I feel like I learned so much. If you liked this episode, then go back and listen to my episode with Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, a psychologist who specializes in how screens damage children's brain development. It's one of our most shared episodes ever, and that came out in season 2 of The Spillover, episode 14. Next week on The Spillover, we will be finishing up our health and wellness month with an episode you won't want to miss. That episode will be out next Thursday at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. And just because Health and Wellness Month is ending and we'll go back to splicing in other interviews from people with interesting stories or expertise on other subjects, that doesn't mean that health and wellness content for the year is over, okay? These types of guests will still be sprinkled in randomly, and I have found a lot more experts that I am dying to talk to. If you like this show and you wish there was more content, there is. Subscribe to Poplitics on YouTube. That's my daily show where I cover pop culture news of the day from a conservative perspective, and also the place where you can watch the Spillover interviews. I'm Alex Clark, and this is The Spillover. Love you, mean it. Bye.